Was Franklin Roosevelt Hamiltonian in his espousal of big government, but Jeffersonian in his concern for the forgotten man? What do you think?
Alexander Hamilton took on the role as the first Secretary of Treasury of the United States with unquestioned brains and an assertive character. He even sometimes disregarded the boundaries of his own power and reached into the affairs of his opposite, Thomas Jefferson.
He
Believed that the American government should be similar to that of the British system, less democratic. He didn't have much faith in the common man. Hamilton favored a strong central government while he viewed state governments as secondary. Hamilton urged Congress to take on the debts of states from the recent war. While this helped increase national credit, it pushed the United States $21.5 million further in debt. Hamilton wanted to increase the number of federal employees to match a wanted increase in the federal government.
Thomas Jefferson, on the other hand, promoted the establishment of state central governments. He believed in government for the common man and distrusted special privilege. He favored strong state governments over a strong central government and wanted to preside over a country that made policies with strict interpretation of the Constitution. Jefferson had deep faith in the common people. He believed that the poor farmer also deserved to be educated and exercise their rights as an American citizen.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
These unhappy times call for the building of plans that rest upon the forgotten. The unorganized but the indispensable units of economic power for plans like these of 1917 that built from the bottom up and not from the top down, that put their faith once more in the forgotten man at the bottom of the economic pyramid.
Franklin D. Roosevelt, the Forgotten Man, April 7, 1932 radio address to promote his legislation plan, the New Deal.
Roosevelt, like Thomas Jefferson, had deep faith in the common man. His wife, the First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, was one influence. She often battled for the impoverished and oppressed. Roosevelt distrusted the elite bankers who caused the poor economic state of America, denouncing them as money changers in his inaugural address. Likewise, he distrusted special privilege and wished to lower voting qualifications. FDR was aware of the United States' declining welfare state, and he promised to the American people, nobody is going to starve. He wanted to help the minorities, the blacks, the poor, the urbanites, and the new immigrants. To achieve this goal, FDR announced his plan, the New Deal.
The first round of legislation, dubbed Must legislation, during the first 100 days open session of Congress, the period when the majority of the New Deal was accepted, Congress passed nearly every act that came to them. FDR enjoyed his executive blank check powers and achieved in passing many of his 3 R's reforms. Roosevelt continued expanding the executive branch. In 1939, he passed the Reorganization Act, which gave him the power to reorganize the executive branch, to which he had been criticized for his attempts to suppress the Supreme Court and to create a dummy Congress. His goal was to purge dissenting members of Congress who were against the New Deal. The common perception that the growth of big government began in the 1930s. However, the reality is that the total government expenditures did not grow more rapidly in the 1930s than they had between 1900 and 1930, but big government, that is the federal government, did expand dramatically relative to state and local governments. The federal government was accused of being a bureaucratic, meddling regimentation. There was validity in the statement, for the federal government became the single largest business in the country, with hundreds and thousands of employees.
Let's talk about the New Deal. The New Deal emerged as Franklin D. Roosevelt's solution to the Great Depression as he spilled forward a set of federal programs after taking office in 1933.
The New Deal stabilized the banks and cleaned up the financial mess left over from the stock market crash of 1929. It stabilized prices for industry and agriculture, and it aided bankrupt state and local governments. Also, with the Agricultural Adjustment Act, the AAA, the New Deal helped poor farmers meet their mortgage payments. The Banking Act of 1933 brought an end to the panic that gripped the nation's banking system. The success of the Banking Act had depended on the willingness of the American people to place their faith and their money in their local banks. To assure the people of the safety of their deposits, FDR convinced the public through his fireside chats, his presidential radio program. This was backed by the newly established Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the FDIC, which for the first time in the country's history, individual citizens were provided with a measure of security against the unpredictable turns of the market. Likewise, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, set up to avert a further crash of the stock market. The 1935 Social Security Act led to the establishment of the Social Security Administration and the creation of a national system of old age pensions and unemployment compensation. Social Security also granted federal financial support to dependent children, the handicapped, and the blind. The expansion of federal government's responsibilities provided the public with relief. In 1937, the economy declined as the Social Security taxes that paid for the government program, hurt the people's paychecks. The New Deal had gained small debts throughout the years, but in April 1937, FDR turned to Keynesianism, a dogma by economist John Maynard Keynes based on the program for planned deficit spending. Under Roosevelt's reign, the states were secondary and private enterprises were hurt as a result of the government's plan for exceeding their debts and economic plan. The national debt from $19,487 billion in 1932 to $40,440 billion by 1939.
1 in 4 Americans was out of work by 1933. The New Deal created a number of special agencies that provided jobs for millions of workers and wages that saved millions more in their desperate families. It also recognized the rights of workers to organize in unions. The first act to reduce unemployment was the Federal Emergency Relief Act, which led to the establishment of the Federal Emergency Relief Administration, the FERA, headed by Harry L. Hopkins. The FERA aided highly skilled workers. The Civil Works Administration, the CWA, was a program to provide temporary employment relief during 1933 to 1934. The CWA was available to all locals. Therefore, its jobs were often menial tasks. Relief within FDR's New Deal came with additional jobs, 8.5 million to be exact, provided by new agencies like the Civilian Conservation Corps and the Works Progress Administration, allowing citizens to work for government checks.
The New Deal touched every state, city, and town, improving the lives of ordinary people and reshaping the public sphere. New Dealers and the men and women who worked on the New Deal programs believed they were not only serving their families and communities, but building the foundation for a great and caring society. The Fair Labor Standards Act established rights of workers, minimum wage, overtime pay, youth employment restrictions for government employees. Roosevelt gave workers the guaranteed right to unionize and bargain with their superiors. The Federal Housing Administration, the FHA, made home ownership affordable for millions of low-income Americans. Or, if homeowners were struggling with their bills, the Homeowners Loan Corporation, the HOLC, bailed out many poor that were in threat of losing their houses. The New Deal offered hope and restored the faith of the American people in their representative institutions. It also transformed the federal government into an active instrument of social justice and established a network of laws and institutions designed to protect the American economy from further harm.
William Luckenberg has labeled FDR's New Deal a halfway revolution, as it included principles from both opposing founding fathers, and was argued by some for being too intrusive versus not making enough reform.
That was all about Franklin Roosevelt. Let's answer the question. Remember that Hamilton worked to increase the number of workers employed by federal programs. Hamilton also sought a powerful federal government. On the other hand, Jefferson looked after the common man. He favored local banks as opposed to a national one.
So, do you agree that Franklin Roosevelt was in fact Hamiltonian in his adoption of big government, but Jeffersonian in his concern for the forgotten man?